Back in September 2007, our next guest visited the studio to tell us what he wanted to achieve as Ontario's 28th Lieutenant Governor. Now that his term is almost up, we thought we'd invite him back to see how things went. So here he is, David C. Onley, for a little while longer anyway, the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. And it's great to have you back in this studio.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Nice
Great
to see you again. I'm not going to pretend that this is the most probing first question I've ever asked or that you've ever heard, but do you have any idea how many hands you've shaken over the last 6.5 years?
No, but I can count the number of times that my hand and right wrist have been sore, and that's in the multiple hundreds. So there have been a lot of times at a lot of events. So
how many events?
That's not been fully totaled yet.
Hundreds or thousands, do you figure?
It would be thousands.
Thousands of events in 6.5 years?
Yeah.
Are there days when you wake up over the past 6.5 years and say to yourself, if I have to hear that vice-regal salute one more time, or if I have to attend this damn thing, or shake that you're shaking your head? No,
not
never?
At all. No.
Never?
No, not at all. It's, first of all, the vice-regal salute is a very unique piece of music, a combination of first few bars of God Save the Queen and the final few bars of O Canada. And it was approved by Her Majesty the Queen. The only difficulty with the song is that as soon as we get into the O Canada part, and it's not to be sung because there are no lyrics to it, there are a number of people who think we've just kicked into the national anthem, and so I
they
see
they get confused.
And that is a little bit confusing, but it's a stirring piece of music, and so it's something that I've always enjoyed.
But it's really the case that never in the 6.5 years you've attended an event where you just thought, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, this is just all too much the same.
Well, I don't think too many of the events have been very much the same. Even the award ceremonies, which are repetitive, it will be the same organizers, oftentimes the same location, usually the grand staircase at the legislature. But each group of individuals brings a unique energy to the room and to the ceremony. And as I've often said to people, when they've asked me, don't you get tired of this, that, or the other? And I said, what is there to get tired of? You meet interesting people, and then you get to give them an award for something that's unique or inspiring or something that has contributed to the quality of life of Ontario. And so it can be repetitive, but you almost never come away with being anything except amazed at the people that you've met that day.
Gotcha. One of the things that you told us when you were last here 6.5 years ago that you wanted to accomplish was getting computers to Aboriginal kids who lived in remote places. And just to remind everybody of that part of our conversation, let's play a snippet of it and then we'll chat. Absolutely. Roll tape, please. Can the Lieutenant Governor, does he have the power to pick up the phone and call somebody at Microsoft and say, you know what, I just want 6,000 free computers and I want them delivered north of the French River and I want it now?
Well, I'm not sure I have the authority to do that, or I have the power to do that. I have moral suasion. I think it would be better, instead of having one company, although no reasonable offer will be refused, it would be better to involve a number of organizations and a group of people, because I don't want it to be just a one-trick pony, if you will. I want it to, and I believe this is the case, as I say already, from groups and organizations that I've heard from. They want to be involved, and that is how we're going to sustain it.
Okay, 6.5 years later, did that happen?
Well, I'm amazed how that old camera technology made my hair look darker. I'm sure that's just a camera trick, but
we're good at that here.
We're good at that, yeah. It's been interesting how the program for Aboriginal youth has changed. From that point of that interview, or in fact our first meeting at Queen's Park was within 2 weeks of that interview, of a group of interested individuals who I'm still involved with a plan towards getting laptop computers, because in 2007 they were the most likely candidates to go north to the different fly-in communities. Even then, there was the flicker of the notion on the horizon that there might be these handheld devices that were going to be somewhat cheaper than laptops, and within a year we were looking at handheld devices, now e-books or e-readers, but they were still at $500 to $700. And what was happening over time is that the technology was getting smaller, the cost was dropping quite considerably, but we were still on a path to look at and have laptop computers taken to some of the communities. And in fact, that did occur on a couple of projects, to be specific. What we quickly discovered, though, was that in communication with the communities, that really wasn't the top priority. What really was more preferred were, in fact, these handheld devices, as Rex Murphy has written, saying that virtually everyone can become their own library with a handheld device.
So is that happening?
So that was the direction things started to take. But then something very curious, I would say, happened, unexpected. And that is that I was invited to hold one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings at Queen's Park. And Justice Sinclair came in, and along with Mark Kielberger, the two of us were made honorary witnesses of an official Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearing. That went over so well that I was then invited to a second commission hearing a number of weeks later. And that went so well that the participants asked if we might have a roundtable at Queen's Park. And that then led to a series of roundtables of individuals who were concerned about education in the North, specifically as it related to Aboriginal students, and wanting to create new relationships. And in that process, we ended up having 5 of these roundtables last year, and another one's going to be held fairly shortly. And what happened was, instead of us coming up with specific plans for technology, which 6.5 years ago I saw as the key to the solution of this issue. Instead, we've created a whole new series of interrelationships of groups and organizations which simply didn't even exist. And one of those relationships has led to the distribution of 5,000 Kobo readers to Aboriginal youth in the Greater Toronto Area. And so it was the development of the relationships that caused that to take place, as opposed to going after specific technology and trying to get it into the communities.
A better solution as far as you're concerned.
I believe it is, yes.
Speaking of relationships, one of the more fascinating relationships in public life is that between the First Minister of the day and the Lieutenant Governor of the day. And I would love to take advantage of your being here just to talk about what you can talk about, because I know obviously you're not going to talk much about Kathleen Wynne, she's got the job now. Sure. But Dalton McGuinty, who was Premier during much of your time, who's gone now, I'd like to know more about how it worked. So let's start with this. Can the Lieutenant Governor get a meeting with the Premier basically whenever he wants?
Absolutely. We're each respectful of each other's schedules, and both of us are very, very busy people. But there was never any difficulty in getting through to the Premier's office or arranging a meeting with him.
Do you go to him or does he go to you?
He would always come to my office, and that's just protocol as the Queen's representative.
The Queen's rep does not go to
a political office.
To a political office.
In fact, technically, you know, the Lieutenant Governor is not supposed to, within the Legislative Assembly, and we're only one of 2 jurisdictions that actually has an office within the legislative building with the elected officials. Technically, I'm not supposed to be anywhere else in the building. Now, there are certain realistic allowances for that, but in terms of entry and exit on occasion and attending events within the complex. But there's a clear demarcation that once you've come through the double doors to the music room on the 2nd floor, which is our main room that you've been in many times for awards and ceremonies, that you've now entered the vice-regal domain.
You're at the UN at that point.
Yes, a good way to put it.
Neutral territory.
Yeah.
And again, just as we try to understand how this works, you, when you came into office, pretty firmly planted your flag as somebody who said, we're going to make some progress on disability issues as long as I'm in this office. No doubt in part because of your own experiences with polio, and you've had to deal with those challenges your whole life practically. Yeah. Do you actually, for example, go to the Premier and say, I want X number of dollars for this, or I want this program put in place? Is that how it works? No, it wouldn't happen that way. I would never speak to programs specifically or dollar amounts. And we would regularly get letters from people saying, I need you to go to the government and tell them they need to do this and add this amount more money to the budget, and I want this amount spent and things like that. And we would just send a reply back saying that's just completely beyond our capabilities, where that's not our job, the job of the office of Lieutenant Governor. However, there were various occasions during the term where we met, the Premier and I, Premier McGuinty,
and with some of his ministers on occasion, where I felt there were things that I was seeing out in the general public as it related to accessibility that related directly to the mandate of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And after not days or weeks, but after months of observation and asking a number of people, felt that there was a feedback that wasn't getting to either the civil servants who were administering the act or certainly the politicians who were in charge of the act. And so then on a couple of occasions, both the Premier McGuinty and I sat down and talked about it, and he was appreciative of the information, and I felt that the Lieutenant Governor's job description, amongst other things, or the authority that the Lieutenant Governor has is exactly that is described for Her Majesty the Queen, and that is the right to be consulted and the power to encourage and warn. And on both instances, I simply said to the Premier, this fits somewhere between encouragement and warn. Here, I'm seeing something going off the rails, and for the betterment of the body politic, not the Liberal Party and not the Liberal government, but for the betterment of the body politic, I think you need to know this. And then it was up to him to decide what to do.
There's a line, though, right, that you shouldn't or can't cross in your role. But it sounds like on that occasion you might have snuggled up to the line.
I went up to the line, but not across. In baseball terms, I did not reach over the field, over the fence to stop the home run, but it was right to the fence.
Gotcha. You know, I'm a bit of a history nerd, so I want to ask you about some history that took place on your watch. Towards the end of 2012, as many people will remember, Dalton McGuinty retired as Premier, stepped down, and in doing so, at the same time, asked you to prorogue the Ontario legislature.
Yep.
He said things were getting too hot, he was the lifeguard, everybody out of the pool, let's give everybody a chance to calm down a bit. Constitutionally speaking, did you have to grant that request?
Yes.
You did, you had no choice.
Yes, there was great confusion about that. And in fact, we had literally hundreds of emails came in over the next number of days and weeks from people. And the comments that were directed to me, mostly polite, sometimes not, but the requests and in many instances the demands were for me to exercise power that I not only did not have, but we would never want anyone in a democracy to have, such as you need to go to the opposition leader and tell him to form a new government. Well, no, that's not going to happen. Order the Premier to come back. Well, no, I don't have the authority to order the Premier to come back.
But you do have, I shouldn't say this, do you have, because we saw on the federal scene when, was it Michaëlle Jean who, when Prime Minister Stephen Harper asked for a prorogation, she made him cool his heels for a good few hours while she looked into it. Now, she granted it, but she made him sweat a bit. Did you ever do that to Premier Peterson? McGuinty, I mean?
No, because, I mean, I have a very good staff, and very astute politically, I might add, in terms of what's going on. And so we were fairly convinced that it was going to happen. And so there was, even the day before, we were meeting and discussing the options of prorogation. And the various experts were consulted and came into my office on that same day. So we had actually thrashed out what the options were over several hours, both the day before and the day of, so that by the time the Premier came in to meet with me, we had really covered what the options were, what I could do, what I couldn't do, what I could ask, and what was not reasonable to ask.
It's funny that you say you had an inkling that this was up, because I think it took virtually everybody else by surprise. So where did you get the heads up that this might be coming down the road?
It was just a very simple call on a Sunday afternoon saying that the Premier would like to talk to me the next morning.
So his office got in touch with your office, and that's what sent the antennae up.
Sure, and you're going, well, what's it going to be?
And there's a...
It's not going to be, you know, if you want to come to the Leafs game, I've got some extra tickets.
So you never went to a Leafs game with the Premier?
No, not with the Premier.
Which raises another question. Can you go to stuff with the First Minister of the day?
I would not do that. I don't think it would be appropriate.
You've got to maintain a distance.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's a respectful one. It's interesting you'd mention that, because even just this morning we were talking about some of the, with one of my assistants, my executive assistant, some of the delightful serendipities that have occurred during my term of office, such as being reintroduced to my great aunt, who at that point was 103, and nobody on our side of the family even knew that she was still alive. And the only reason we became reintroduced to that side of the family, and to her in particular, was that on the Remembrance Day ceremony of 2007, the Premier and I attended the same Remembrance Day ceremony at the legislature. And of course it was covered live on various television channels, and my great aunt and my cousin, whom I hadn't seen in 40 or 50 years, were watching it and said, gee, we really must get in touch with David. And it led to a tremendous family reunion that took place, and she lived to another couple of years. And as a result of that chance meeting, she gave me her late brother, my great uncle's memorial medallion as a veteran of World War I who had died at the Battle of the Somme. All of that because the Premier and I attended the same ceremony, which was televised.
And it was not a Leaf game.
And it was not a Leaf game.
It was something more somber.
Indeed.
Did the two of you disagree about anything?
Well, I would put it this way. It really wasn't my position to discuss with him things that we might disagree about. That's an imprecise answer, I appreciate, but we would be talking about what his reasonable requests were as it pertained to a separate conversation related to accessibility. The conversation was quite frank. It wasn't, not that it was disagreeable, but I mean, we were, both of us, trying to advance the issue forward in our own understanding.
I raise it because I think people may remember this scene in The Queen where Helen Mirren's talking to the actor who plays Tony Blair. Is his name Michael Sheen, I think? Yes. And he says he's going to do something, and she says something like, oh, Winston tried that 40 years ago. That's not going to work, so think of something else. Did you have a moment like that with Premier McGuinty?
No, not really, no.
Or with Premier Wynne?
No, although I would say the relationship with Premier Wynne is different because she's a different person, and she tends to reach out a little bit more, I would say, in terms of interacting with the office. But it's neither good nor bad, it's just different.
Does the Lieutenant Governor and his First Minister of the day have to like each other for the wheels to run smoothly?
I think they have to respect each other. I know I respected him, and I would always make the assumption that there was more information on a particular issue that he might have, but I think on the other hand, he respected me in our conversations because I had information that he didn't have, and so I think there was a mutual respect. I mean, my involvement and knowledge of politicians goes back a long time, because some 40 years ago, 40 plus, I was a research assistant for members of the Liberal caucus who were then in opposition, and I was a university student at the U of T in political science, and along with a couple of other young guys, we did research for individual members in the summers of 72, 73, and 74. And it was very exciting times. And you got to meet and you got to work with these people on that level. You also got to meet and work with people who were in the government and people who were at the NDP. And right even from then, I had a profound respect for elected officials, and I still do. And I generally like politicians. I think if there's a misunderstanding in the system, and I am concerned about it, is that most politicians are there to do the right thing. Sure, they're career builders, and sure, there are people that probably shouldn't be in politics, but and I think you might agree with me, the vast majority of them are there for public service and really do want to try to make this province a better place to be.
Although they disagree significantly on what that is.
Yes, yes they do.
Yes. Well, I know the Lieutenant Governor doesn't sully himself with anything as pedestrian as public opinion polling. Mm-hmm. However, so let me inform you, David Charles Onley, that the polls currently suggest that things are really super tight, almost one-third, one-third, one-third between the Liberals, Tories, and New Democrats. And my question is, and of course you know about all the speculation in the air about a possible election campaign over a budget that may or may not pass. Here's the question. Have you had to go back to the book, so to speak, and take a bit of a refresher on what constitutionally you may or may not have to do in the next several months if things unfold in a way that's unforeseen?
There's no question that I have, and that process started within a matter of days of taking office, because of course I was not even in office for a week when Premier McGuinty came to me, and the writ was drawn up, and away we went for the first election.
Let me just interrupt there. When the writ was
drawn up.
Everybody says when the writs drop.
Yes, and it's not.
That's not right.
That's not correct. In fact, I issued a little statement about that in 2007, which was not picked up too widely, but it's a term that the writ is drawn up, and it has just become dropped as time has gone by, because you never see any writs being dropped. And so when you think it through that way, a writ is drawn up. In this case, it's a writ of an election.
Okay, so you're a week on the job, and he comes to you and says, "Let's go."
Me, let's go, and so away we went. And I can tell you that when the first polls showed a complete dead heat, the thought was going through my mind, I'm going to be in the same spot as John Black-Aird. Is there going to be a minority government? Perhaps one party has more popular vote, and the other party has a handful more seats, as it was for David Peterson back in '85. Mm-hmm. And so that began a serious process of consultation, not only with experts, the constitutional experts, but individuals who are part of the Attorney General staff, who are constitutional experts and are assigned to the Lieutenant Governor's office. So we can always get, and do get, constitutional advice. Some of it, for another matter, I sought last week by calling up an individual who's a bona fide constitutional expert.
What was it about?
I can't tell you.
Oh, come on, you can tell me. Come on.
But it was part of just the theoretical aspects of what could be a what if. But there's a bottom line, and that is that regardless of the results, the question that the only real question that the Lieutenant Governor need ask is which party can command the confidence of the House. Mm-hmm. And that's the basis of all discussion points. And so, if the present government came in with, say, a significantly reduced minority, they'd still have the right to go to the legislature in all likelihood to see if they had the confidence of the House. And of course, it was that question that eventually, in 1985, when the agreement was drawn up between David Peterson and Bob Rae, that's what gave the Lieutenant Governor of the day, John Black-Aird, the rationale to say, okay, you now have the confidence of the House because together you form the majority.
He came second, Peterson. Even though,
yes,
he said, even though you came second, you get to be the government because you can command the confidence of the House.
That's right.
Okay.
And that's the nature of our constitutional democracy, mm-hmm. our parliamentary democracy, which, despite these type of mathematical games that inevitably go on, such as the constant watching of the polls, I still think is the qualitatively superior democratic system.
We talked a little bit about this last time you were here 6.5 years ago, so let's play that clip and then we'll come back and chat again. Roll tape.
Right. I was told that if I did decide to turn down the Premier's request that
to go to the polls?
To go to the polls, that it would put me right in the history books immediately, but I have no intention of doing that, believe me.
You can play it straight for now.
I think so.
Well, let's just see if we can get you to indulge in a little first-person history book entry here. Your term will come to an end sometime in the next...
Months.
Months, exactly.
Which means more than one.
but who knows how many. Be honest, wouldn't you love to be the guy on the hot seat if a constitutional crisis were to happen over a spring election?
Oh, sure. I mean, very candidly, certainly I would. But, there are, I have some sense of some of the people that are being considered as the next Lieutenant Governor, and they're hugely qualified people. And so...
and you hope they're appointed in September.
And I draw, a page from the playbook of Team Canada, short shifts and whoever's on the ice at the right time, as long as we win. So, it's the personal side of me, yes, absolutely. But if the timing isn't there, it's not there. I mean, it's remarkable to me that I've had not one, but two elections, that there's been a minority government, that there's been a prorogation issue that was now has been written about extensively by different constitutional scholars. That there have been, I'll install very shortly my third OPP commissioner, and so my term is now the longest of any lieutenant governor since the end of World War II. Huh. And so, for that, I'm extremely grateful, both to the Prime Minister initially for extending the term in order to achieve certain things. Do
you get any input in who replaces you?
Not really. I've made my views known, but I'm one of many people who they've approached. The Prime Minister, I think, came up with an excellent process in terms of the selection of David Johnston and the lieutenant governors since the David Johnston appointment, and that is to try to take it out of it being a purely political appointment by having a semi-permanent committee, 2 permanent members based on the federal scene and other members who are called into the committee representing the respective provinces as the need arises. And so some very highly qualified individuals are then able to gather names that they've approached individual MPs and individual MPPs and have asked for input. Who is there in your riding, for instance, that you think might be a good candidate? And so there's been a wide search. And so I'm very confident with whoever the person is going to be an excellent lieutenant governor.
In our last minute here, I know you've enjoyed the job, but you're too young to retire, so you're going to probably want another job after this one's done. So what are you going to do after this one's over?
Well, I hope to be teaching. I've spoken to a couple of institutions about that. If there's an appropriate board position that would be related to accessibility, then certainly would be something I'd be interested in. And I definitely want to write a book about the experiences. And so we'll see what happens, but that's really the objective that I have.
And I asked the Premier this question last week, so let me ask you too as we finish up here. Complete the following sentence. Having been Lieutenant Governor for 6.5 years, I so much better understand what?
That we have a remarkable democracy and a remarkable province. It truly is a unique place. The quality of individuals, especially the young people, leads me to believe that the greatest generation is not necessarily the one that fought in the war. I think that was the bravest generation. But I think the greatest generation, quite realistically, are the young people that are coming up right now. They're about to assume positions of responsibility, the high school, university, and post-university students. I've seen so many of them, hundreds and hundreds of them, and the things that they are doing, the creative projects that they're a part of that are voluntary, that have just sprung from the heart, if you will. And I really think our best days are ahead.
It was great of you to come to our studio 6.5 years ago when you got the job, and we're really grateful that you came back for a repeat performance. Thanks for everything you've done for the province, and good luck with what lies ahead.
Thank you very much.
David Charles Onley, 28th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.